The European region in late 19th century culture has traditionally been identified with conservatism, resistance to change, and either antagonism to nationalisation or support of nation building. Thus, Joseph and Donovan argues that the fascination with regions during this period was rooted in resistance to, I quote, the enforcement of national social norms and processes of standardization on a national level. Timothy Baycroft's studies and Joost Augusteijn and Erik Storm's essay collection Region and State in 19th Century Europe from 2012 are premised on exactly such analyses also of regional nationalism. What scholars have so far often overlooked are the significant transnational dimensions of regions in this period. As this paper will argue, it is in illustrated periodicals that these transnational engagements with regions becomes most visible. Articles and illustrations published in such widely read magazines reveal a strong fascination with regions in countries elsewhere in Europe, and paradigm shifts in thinking about regions in the past and the ways in which periodicals engaged with regionalism are therefore called for. Furthermore, we may witness a transnational circulation of images and narratives about regions in the press, through processes of cultural transfer, repertoires of cultural representations that are shaped by transcultural interactions in what Wolfgang Welch calls cross-national cultural spaces. Illustrated periodicals borrowed heavily from periodicals elsewhere, a process accelerated by the expansion of telegraph cables across Europe and the Atlantic. As Captain Waters observes, this expanding network undoubtedly one of the most significant developments for this transmission of news in the second half of the 19th century. News and illustrations could travel faster as copies struck off and could be sent by wire to papers and editors abroad. While illustrated periodicals have traditionally been identified with nation building, they had a significant transnational scope in terms of subject matter and material. It was common that illustrations and text, either in the original language or in translation, traveled from one national context to another, being reprinted in periodicals elsewhere in or beyond Europe, especially, as Thomas Smits notes, in cheaper publications abroad. This paper will examine these under-researched transnational dimensions of cultural conceptualizations of the region in illustrated periodicals such as L'Illustration, L'Univers Illustré, Piazzetta Letteraria, and Harper's Weekly, by examining their representations of these regions and especially Connemara, the western part of County Galway, during the period of 1870 and 1890. This time frame is relevant, for it was a period in which the rural regions in the west of Ireland were marked by agrarian unrest, modernization, depopulation through emigration, and were at the same time perceived by nationalist Celtic Revivalists as the habitat of the Gaelic peasant, as Daniel Deany, for example, wrote in Peasant Law from Gaelic Ireland. In other words, as the dwelling of cultural communities from which a pre-colonial traditional Irishness could be retrieved, that could form the basis of post-colonial identities. Now, the present study will, moreover, do this by looking at pictures and words which create meaning in conjunction with one another, as Peter Sinnema's seminal work has suggested, and by studying the illustrated periodicals as not just carriers, but active agents in generating effect and meaning-making. In so doing, this paper will contribute to ongoing debates about European illustrated periodicals as spaces of encounter that not only cross boundaries of gender and class, but, as I will also state, regional and transnational borders as well. The Irish Tourist, a Dublin-based magazine that ran between 1894 and 1907, which frequently used the modern medium of photography to record images of traditional rural life in Ireland's West. For example, its May edition of 1895 included a series of photographs of women spinning wool to accompany an article about hand weaving in the west of Ireland, to lend authenticity to the descriptions it gave. The strong focus on the arts and crafts in County Clare and County Galway in the printed pictures was not unlike some illustrations from the period that would decorate publications of local colour fiction by Irish writers, and that would frequently emphasize domestic trades, fishing, as well as rural labour, such as turf cutting. This self or auto-image of Irish regional life that was conveyed in literary publications and the media was in turn not dissimilar to what Joep Leersen would call the hetero-image of Ireland's West expressed by illustrated media in England and in France. In fact, during the 1870s and the 1880s, magazines such as the Illustrated London News and L'Illustration often sought to map out regional types of Irish character, using engravings to outline specific traits of labour, physiognomy, and dress. The Illustrated London News frequently published full-page illustrations, which consisted of a series of tableaux of regional Irish character, to appeal to what Laurel Brake and Marisa de Moore have called a popular appetite for illustration. Thus, on the 4th of December 1880, the Illustrated London News included this series of vignettes which clearly distinguish the rural folk from County Meath, County Galway, and County Roscommon and County Kildare on the basis of appearance. It is interesting that this series of images, possibly made by combining various woodblocks so that various engravers could have worked on them simultaneously, displays awareness of regional characteristics of the peasantry in Ireland, rather than typecasting one overarching national character. At the same time, by placing these sketches of regional types together, the illustration creates what I would like to call a panoramic vision of rural Irishness. In his seminal work on 19th century visual cultures, Jonathan Porter discusses the popularity of panoramic illusion in painting and newspaper illustrations, explaining that the audience's immersion in visual space with attention to minute detail offered them the illusion of total comprehension and ideological control, by appealing to the spectators, I quote, the desire for simultaneity. This series of engraved images of local varieties of Irish peasantry can be interpreted as appealing to the audience's desire for totality. They allow readers to grasp Irish peasantry in all its local varieties. Moreover, in view of the fact that most readers of the Illustrated London News were based in England, this panoramic overview of Irish rural characters can be read through an imperial lens. The encompassing vision of the Irish other suggests a complete inventory of its types and its manifestations. During 1880-1881, the Illustrated London News would publish several vignette series on regional rural Ireland, and you can actually see here some on the slides. And in particular, impressions or images of Western regions. On 26th of February 1881, a composition of engravings featuring peat cutting, drying, and transport among the peasantry of County Roscommon was published, offering a sense of trans-temporal totality of the entire process in one illustrated page. A similar panoramic vision of local Irish existence in the West, and in this case County Galway, is conveyed in Sketches in Ireland, a series of vignettes made by Harry Furniss to go with an article in the issue of the 31st of January 1880. What we notice here is a combination of typecasting of Connemara women in terms of physiognomy and clothing, with a depiction of traditional labour. Women mending the fishing nets in the cladach and carrying turf sacks on their backs, as well as a cladach boy making twine. Furthermore, when we compare this combination of engravings with the earlier mentioned series of vignettes on peat processing that you see on the left-hand side here on the slide, it is striking that local women take up a central position in these representations of the region, as forces of labour, but also as participating in the rural domestic pastimes of tea drinking, albeit not in the drawing room that many female middle-class readers were used to, but rather in the fields. The centrality of tea drinking in the image's composition may generate the effect of bringing the exotic Western Irish peasant women closer to the referential framework of the magazine's audiences. At the same time, however, the women are decidedly outlandish in their attire, environment, and employment. Scholars such as Marguérite Price, Judith Thackley, and Josephine Donovan contend that in 19th century cultural expressions of the region, such as, for example, local choral literature, women play a significant role as the epitomes and preservers of traditions and folklore. We can actually see similar patterns in how the Illustrated London News identifies regional cultures with femininity, For example, also in Sketches of the Mayo Peasantry from the 20th of November 1880 and Sketches of Ireland published on 16th of July 1870, which also focuses on the Clodagh community in County Galway and represents women who are spinning and are making nets. At the same time, it is tempting to see this focus on the femininity of Irish regions in the 1880 Sketches of Ireland, in light of the strong gender inflections of imperial ideologies, which in the case of Ireland often depicted the country as a helpless young woman in need of protection from a masculine Britain. The suggestion appears to be endorsed by the text which frames the illustration of these sketches in Ireland, which positions the area around Galway, and in particular the Clodagh, as the uncivilized other. The author states that, I quote, "No place in the west of Ireland bears an aspect more distinctly associated with a long period of separation from the ordinary civil and social life of this kingdom, which was the lot of Connaught in former ages, and to which its backward condition in present times may in some degree be ascribed," unquote. The article furthermore argues that the artist's sketches on the quay at Galway in the Clodagh, and those of a group of Connemara women and of a boy with a cumbrous sort of spinning wheel producing twine for the making of their fishing nets, gives a lively notion of the appearance of this primitive folk. This observation of the local people as unrefined is followed by a remark which suggests duty on the part of a London government to bring modernity to the area. The article states, "It is much to be desired that some official effectual measures could be taken to revive the prosperity of Galway as a mercantile seaport." Additionally, the article likens the inhabitants of the Clodagh to gypsies because they have a code of law and form of government administered by an elective monarch who is called in Galway the King of the Clodagh, creating the impression that the Clodagh are not only unique in the traditions that they observe, but also are very unruly. Now, during the 1870s and 1880s, in the illustrated press, the western regions in Ireland were often also contextualized by the economic distress and agrarian unrest that marked life in the countryside. In the decades following the famine, Ireland was afflicted by recurring episodes of failed potato harvest and poverty. In 1879 saw a renewed outbreak of potato rot and famine, though on a much smaller scale, and particularly in the province of Connaught. Extreme poverty went hand in hand with violent boycotting campaigns against those who supported the landed class during the so-called Land War. The social-political reality shaped representations of the Irish Western regions in illustrated newspapers across the globe. Thus, Scènes de la vie irlandaise, an article which appeared in L'Illustration on the 15th of November 1873, is accompanied by illustrations of Western types of peasantry made by the artist Jean Morbard in London to demonstrate type et physiognomie d'Irlande, such as farmers that go to market and a pig herder. The article itself does not go into regional traditions and traits at all, but rather seeks to highlight the hot temper of the Irish as a national trait, which leads to so much outrage. You can actually read, "Malheureusement, il pousse à la querelle. Il est rare que la fête se termine sans rien." Additionally, the article specifically highlights the destitution of the Irish peasantry. Ireland may be fertile, yet it is extremely poor. We can read, "L'Irlande devait être un grenier d'abondance, et cependant elle est pauvre." The farmers suffer under the dire conditions imposed upon them by landlords, which often result in assassination of the landed classes by the tenantry. If you look at the slide here, you can actually see a quote in French, which actually illustrates that, and which actually at the end says, "Le meurtre de landlord par son fermier." Now, in similar fashion, the cover illustration of the Illustrated London News of 21st of February 1880, designed by the artist Richard Cotton Woodville Jr., initially appears to bring a picture of the Connemara tradition of obstructionism to the journal's readers as a regional pleasantry that involves a cow and a pig. However, the article that references the cover image is called Distress in Ireland, and addresses the scene as offering relief in comparison to the miseries witnessed by the artist in the rural area around Galway. As the text states, I quote, "The stranger travelling, even through Connemara, where the state of most of the population in these days is very sad, may have his melancholy mood relieved in some degree by such queer incidents as that which our artist met with on the road, in the shape of an obstructionist stopping the car that conveyed him across the country. He would have been glad to have seen pigs and other sights of comfort and prosperity far more abundant than they were." The article further digresses on the charitable efforts made by the Duchess of Marlborough to provide relief to the local poor, thus adding an additional layer of imperial improvement to the framing of the regional image. Woodville's engraving was reprinted in l'Univers Illustré on the 17th of April 1880, with the caption "Souvenir d'Irlande, une scène populaire sur la route de Connemara." The short article that comes with the illustration likewise emphasizes that the gaiety that the image expresses is far from the moods that generally overlays the region. It actually says, "L'effroyable misère que se vit depuis de si longs mois sur les malheureux Irlandais est loin de diminuer." As this example reveals, transnational circulation of text of images in the press would not only be restricted to imperial context, but went way beyond the scope. That text and illustrations of regions that were printed transnationally through cultural transfer would often contextualize these images in similar ways becomes clear from an illustration depicting women carrying baskets of peat by an unknown artist. This engraving from the graphic of the 24th of January 1880, called "Bringing in Fuel from the Hills near Kylemore," a place in the boglands of Connemara, is not used to endorse a tradition of peat gathering in which many women were traditionally also involved. Rather, the throng of women carrying the collected turf on their back in traditional wicker baskets are used to convey an impression of the extreme hardship and poverty enjoyed by the Connemara people in face of another wide-scale famine. This becomes clear from the other engravings in this series. One, as you can also see here on the slide, of a woman desperately looking for food at the shoreline. He was also referenced in the article by the travelling artist, as there is a sort of edible seaweed called dillisk used by the people on the Connemara sea coast. I saw a poor woman picking up a meal of it. The text alludes to the plentiful presence of fuel. That's also what you see in this article. So that hills and bogs are busy with women and girls carrying loads of turf on their backs. So regional traditions are situated in a narrative of economic conditions. Now, the images of women who carry turf baskets on their backs was reprinted in the American illustrated periodical Harper's Weekly only 2 weeks later, on the 7th of February 1880, accompanied by the caption "The distress in Ireland, peat gathering on the moors." And the accompanying article "Troubles in Ireland" is partially a verbatim rendering of this text from the graphic, thereby testifying to the recycling and reproduction of media images and text across borders through cultural transfer. Additionally, the article contains a new passage on Charles Stewart Parnell as leader of the Land League and the outbreak of, I quote, "violence in certain localities," situating the image of the turf-carrying women in the context of agitation and politics. Furthermore, while this article places the picture in the setting of Western Ireland, it is not as regionally specific as the item in the graphic. Interestingly, regional distinctions seem to carry more weight in British newspapers than in the more foreign presses of France and the United States, which tend to frame local representations within a larger narrative about the Irish question. Now, the image of women carrying peat or digging up turf appears to be part, we could say, of recurrent visual repertoires of Western regions of Ireland during the 1870s and the 1880s. You can actually see another example here on the slide. It's an engraving called "Turf Gatherers in Ireland" and was published in Frank Leslie's Popular Monthly in April 1880. The illustration is part of a set of images that are not very similar in style and that appear to have been borrowed from other illustrated periodicals as well. For instance, a peasant's funeral has been taken over from Harper's Weekly, and you can actually see it here on the slide, which on the 18th of June 1870 published the image with the subscript "Peasant Funeral in the Mamturk Mountains of Connemara, Ireland." What becomes clear is that the original regional specification of the image has been eliminated upon republication. In fact, in Frank Leslie's popular monthly, the illustration of the Connemara funeral and the previously mentioned engraving of the female turf bearers are incorporated into an item entitled The New Irish Movement, which reminisces the 1845-49 Great Famine, discusses Irish land politics, the Land League, and the turmoil and unrest it generates, and it also compares Ireland's land system with those in Belgium, Switzerland, Western Germany, France, Norway, and Russia. Actually, it says, will the Irish agrarians venture to tell us that their cultivating masses are possessed of these qualifications? Judged by a comparison with the habits of the Belgians and Switzers, we know of no country where it would be less of a blessing to the agricultural classes to convert them into the owners of the land, unquote. Now, by comparison, in the original context in Harper's Weekly, you can also see that here on the slide, the image of the funeral procession is used to impart local customs and dress in Connemara. We can actually read in the article, the dress of the man of this mountain district is like that of the Western Highlanders of Scotland in their rough grey tweed and Kilmarnock bonnets. The women cover their heads and shoulders with a square piece of white flannel, which is used, like the Scottish plate, for other purposes, as a coverlet when sleeping or to carry a burden or a child in. Both publications situate the original, specifically regional illustration in transnational frameworks. Harper's Weekly draws analogies between dress worn by the peasantry in Connemara and the Scottish traditional attire, as the means to clarify Connemara local colour to its readers. In Frank Leslie's popular monthly, analogies that are evoked are going beyond the British Empire to incorporate trans-European vantage points on land reform. And here, local colour, however, loses its connotations with a specific set of traditions. More specifically, the images of traditional labour and dress are here used alongside illustrations of land agitation and uproar, suggesting readers to view connections between the images of traditional rural Western Irish life and these depictions of revolt. In this manner, representations of the region become highly politicised. Sometimes images previously published would travel really far to unexpected readerships. We may retrieve these routes due to the increasing digitalization of periodicals across Europe and computer programs to recognize images, though, as Jasper Schelstraete and Marianne van Remoortel have also warned us, we may miss many data too if we leave out the non-digitized, as well as text and images that cannot be identified by any electronic means. Okay, what we see here on the slide is a splendid specimen of a farmer from Galway wearing clothing of grey frieze made of wool by peasants in Ireland's southwest. And this is actually stated in an article which first appeared in the Graphic of 18th of February. And the woodcut then made its way into the Romanian Telegraful de Bucuresti, where it appeared in the same year, 1886, on the 26th of May. Likewise, this illustration from Harper's Weekly, which I show you here, was actually originally published on the 28th of February 1880, but circulated into the foreign press for the Polish illustrated magazine Biesiada Literacka, reprinted it a week later on the 5th of March 1880 to accompany the article Głód w Irlandii, which actually means famine in Ireland. Other illustrations that had been included in Harper's Weekly were not reproduced here, so it was actually just a single image. And it's actually just a sole image of a well-dressed man, it's actually this one, sitting in a carriage who speaks to peasantry in the parish of Clifton, Connemara. The two articles that are printed along with this image, one in English therefore and one in Polish, both provide an account of the distressed circumstances of the local population in the west of Ireland and of the frictions between the landlords and the tenants. The article in Harper's Weekly, Ireland's Possibilities, details the degree of wretchedness and lack of prospects encountered by various classes, from sheep farmers to basket makers, as well as addresses the failure of descendancy to improve the lot of the tenantry, as famine once more stares them into the face. And you can actually see it here also on the slide. It was pointed out that public works would best meet the present evil. There is, however, a great horror of drainage or improvement undertaken by the landlords. Now, the article in Biashara Literaca likewise discusses tensions between landlords and tenants, but interestingly also includes a broader critique of British-Irish colonial relations, in particular the ruinous agrarian policies of the London government. This subsequently related to critique the analogous miserable position of the Polish serf, especially in the region of Galicia. So actually what the article does is it creates a sort of transnational context or transnational connotation to the regional situation in Ireland. And this suggests an interesting case in which regions promote a sense of transnational affiliation and solidarity. Now, the example of how an image from Harper's Weekly came to be reused in a Polish periodical suggested the transfer of visual and discursive regional representations is multidirectional, and that these repertoires may attain different meanings when relocated to different European as well as transatlantic contexts. The transferability, but above all that, the fluidity of visual and textual representations of the region expands both Straff's claim that indeed the definitions of the borders of Europe become much more problematic and contested, not only in political historical terms, but I would like to add in terms of cultural production as well. The ways in which periodical depictions of Ireland's western regions, and especially Connemara, who framed politically and crossed over into transatlantic publication context, is further evidence for the strong interactions between illustrated presses on both sides of the Atlantic in general during the 19th century. Though it is likely that the huge interest in the US press in, for example, Irish regions in the West may also have been sparked off by the massive influx of famine immigrants to North America, and the subsequent emergence of transnational affiliations and transcultural dynamics that, as Thomas Feist observes, characterize relations between home and diaspora communities. It is therefore important to view the transfer of regional representations not just in transnational context of cultural production and readership markets, but also in relation to migration and class relations in and beyond Europe. Thank you very much.